Hello and welcome to this edition of episode 9, I think it is now, of this channel, which I've created to discuss my book, The Dichotic Dilemma, The Fabric of Life. My name is Raleigh Tudor, and as you might see, I have had a haircut today. I do prefer and like the disheveled look which I have been sporting the last few videos, but suffice to say, perhaps it is good to freshen up a little bit, and the barber did a good job. In all seriousness, this episode is going to be dedicated to a continuation of a theme, really, which was based from my last video, episode 8, and I referenced the work of British author and broadcaster, or newspaper editor, I should say, and columnist Douglas Murray, and I will focus on Mr. Murray today. I am still quite taken aback and flabbergasted from listening to his book, as I discussed in my last episode, A Strange Death of Europe, where he points to the end of European civilization based on the rising numbers of immigrants, particularly immigrants of the brown or darker persuasion coming into Europe. And he says this is the responsibility of lazy and cowardly politicians. And what was quite fascinating too was another video that I saw when this gentleman was being interviewed, Mr. Murray. And the gentleman interviewing him said that to the effect that he was a prophet and his words were prophetic. Well, I suppose at this stage, I do want to say, in the Bible, it says, beware of false prophets. And I will expand on why I say this in this video. And of course, read an excerpt from the book at the end. So Mr. Murray proposes that the European continent is, and essentially the destruction of white civilization is at hand due to the influx of immigrants. I mean, this is, I found it very difficult digesting this, because over the past few years, I have been teaching myself to learn the true value of being a human being and valuing other human beings. So it's wholly frightening and disheartening that such opinions hold sway out there. And I've been thinking about this a lot today, and I hope I can articulate it as well as I've been ruminating in my head. So my question is, what does Mr. Murray want? does he want the expulsion of brown people from Europe? But then the question is, then what world do we want to create? Because of course, Europeans do go to other countries too and settle there. But of course, they're called expats. So this speaks to the double standard of Mr. Maris and people of his persuasion's point of view. And what's more interesting is, so in Mr. Maris' perfect world, Europeans stay in Europe, and it's for Europeans, and Africans, Asians, etc. stay where they belong to. However, I wonder if this works the other way for Mr. Murray. That if Africans can come to Europe, and any movement of human beings intercontinentally should be stopped, and they should be penned in where they belong, as it were. So what of economic movement then? Seeing that the whole point of Western expansion into Africa and Asia and other parts of the world was for economic betterment. So should and can European companies be in Africa? Should they be in Africa? Should they be in Asia? Because of course, it can be fine that Europe gets all the benefits, and Europeans, of an open world and an open market, and none of the challenges. Because it's exactly the fact that wealth is centered in European nations, because of the history we know, that a lot of people from outside Europe feel that their chances are better in Europe, particularly in countries like the United Kingdom and America. So isn't it then fair to say, Mr. Murray, that you can't have it both ways? You can't have access to the world so that you can get what you want and you can get the movement you want. But if the other human beings in the world also want to move to better themselves, they shouldn't, because they're going to destroy Western civilization. You know, this is not quite the slave master's mindset or the colonial mindset, or if we go and take from the weaker, lesser people, but it's not too far off. It is certainly the progeny, the offspring of that type of thinking. And he does say it himself, Mr. Murray, in the interview, that when this movement of brown people into England started, was to rebuild the country after World War II. But they should have done the job and then been told to go back. Because of course, that's all we are as brown people, for the likes of Mr. Murray. Something to be exploited for their benefit. And when done, discarded. No different to a slave. So this is the arch of history following us into the present day. And one always wonders, why is the media so negative? Why is the constant drum up against immigration, when some economists will tell you that immigration is a net positive for the country economically? And generally, immigrants are a net contributor. Yet, the impression you'd get from the likes of Mr. Murray's papers and contributions is that we are a net negative, the monster to be feared. He goes on to say in that interview that when Angela Merkel allowed the Syrian, must have been, refugees to come in the millions as they did, and Germans were waiting at the terminals and train stations, giving them high fives and giving them candy and presents, that was an example of German guilt, and that what they in fact were doing was allowing the enemy in. This is Mr. Murray's world. You can clearly see his impression of what other people is, brown people. When in my opinion, in my perspective, 200 years from now, 300 years from now, when the historians write what Angela Merkel did against, you can imagine the sort of pressure and the reaction she knew she was going to get. That was saintly conduct, in my opinion. Yet for Mr. Murray, it showed some kind of guilt complex, he said. And of course, the purpose of this channel is to discuss the phenomena of the dichotic dilemma. For me, there couldn't be any more stark exemplification of this phenomenon. And what I find more fascinating is that Mr. Murray sees himself as someone holding the truth. And when he's challenged, he says, you must say it because it is the truth. And of course, what is truth? And yes, so I'm not quite sure if I've articulated that as well as I hope, but also part of this exercise for me is to create conversation. So hopefully at some point we can readdress these issues. I say this: we all have a choice what we believe. You can choose to believe people like Douglas Murray, who want to make you terrified of others. Or you can choose to believe in the humanity of others. Yes, the world is a complex place. Yes, immigration is a complex subject. Indeed, in South Africa, they have a lot of problems with xenophobia. Black on black, burning them on the streets with tires and necklacing them, as they call it, chopping them down with machetes. So it's not a racial issue now. Because, of course, I'm not here to point fingers or necessarily even be political. But I think it's in the process of observing society as I do, one has to discuss the matters. And I will say to Mr. Murray, sir, I wonder what your position on the British Empire is and the exploits of imperialist uh, um, war expeditions out into the Middle East and Africa and places of the sort. The role that BP played early in the last century in the overthrow of the Iranian regime in the search for oil, which of course creates some of the enmity that we see today in the world. Because of course, when Boris Johnson says he's proud of the British Empire, I don't know how much of that is really considering the more nefarious aspects of it, which is what, obviously, the people affected by the exploits of the British Empire would say. Because, of course, had Western expansion and colonial expansion, Cecil John Rhodes, etc., had they not Riley's, and all these Christopher Columbus, etc., had they not set sail for the Americas and the Asias, the world that Mr. Murray decries, where the brown people are flooding Europe, would not exist. What do you say to that, Mr. Murray? That perhaps it's worth looking at the root cause of all of this. Because, of course, had the peoples been left where they were and the world not opened up by Western and European colonialism and expansion and conquest, then this problem you speak of would not exist. The basic wish of any human being is to live a good life, to live a comfortable life, and be able to look after those they care about. Because, of course, they will decry the economic migrants. Because, of course, we should only let those who are in need, fleeing war, etc., which Mr. Murray, I'm sure, is probably not even keen on. And we should only let in the brightest and the best. Of course, let's get everything that's good for ourselves and leave the rest. Yes. So, yes, it is something that has really struck me and entangled my consciousness. And ultimately, what I tend to believe is that the only way to truly address our problems is to, of course, pardon the cliche, but address the root causes. And I'll say to you, Mr. Murray, the root causes of the world that you fear, of brown invasion, is, of course, of your own making. Not yours, sir, but certainly the exploits that you defend and probably even praise empire and exploitation. What do you say to that, sir? So with your platform, instead of making people fear the other, the immigrant, the dark person, why don't we start a truly restorative conversation? You see, it's not okay for me, unfortunately, Mr. Murray, that Western hegemony and the capitalist exploits of the West mean that quite a lot of brown people around the world are impoverished. We also, sir, deserve comfortable lives. And the yearning for success is as intrinsically human as you can imagine. And that's why, of course, these people will get on these boats and dinghies. Risk it all, as your expeditionary forces did in the years gone by, and your companies do going out there into the world to exploit. So as I say, this is, I hope I've covered all the relevant points, and the fact that Mr. Murray is seen as prophetic is truly terrifying and chilling for me. But also, it helps you see and understand the world we live in. Because at times you don't understand newspaper headlines. But when you see the content of the character of the people writing this, then it's clear as day. And of course, our own Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, is not a stranger to such writings, with his watermelon smiles and pickaninnies. And yes, he is the leader of the nation. So of course, what world can a brown person like me hope for in light of this? But I will say this. Ultimately, my platform is for the advocating for a better, more equitable world. And in my most deluded of fantasies, something even more outstanding. But that's perhaps for another day. Because the question you're asking, the ultimate question is, what is it to be a human being? What is the purpose of life? What is the nature of existence? I always marvel when I look up at the skies and see the sun and the stars and know that we're part of an infinite universe. Yet we have to be here. And have to listen to Mr. Murray, Douglas Murray, divide us. So I'll leave it at that for today, and say that I'm not sure really, but I think I've made the point. So going back to the book, the ultimate knowledge is the knowledge of self. As a second assertion to be made, this point correlates with and corroborates very well the first fundamental assertion made with regards to the relationship between civilization and the basic instinct. Understanding yourself and getting to know who you are is important for realizing clarity of purpose and can bring balance to one's existence. A mind that is in a state of confusion is an unstable mind, a volatile mind, which can then lead to an unstable and volatile, coarse emotional state. That instability can then be brought to bear to the detriment of the individual and others through adverse, unbalanced actions. Hence, understanding self becomes the avenue towards bringing balance, addressing the extremes of the dichotic dilemma to the benefit of the individual and the wider world. The dichotic dilemma dictates that, naturally, existence is based on there being extremes and how they interplay to create balance and order. Hence, as human beings, understanding this concept, our basic survival instincts, with regards to the fundamentals of who and what we are as an existent species, in a way that's cohesive, is important to bring balance and order to our existence. Existent amongst human beings are disparate groups and individuals, some at polar opposites and some similar, yet all should and do have a place on the planet. In the realm of science through history, curious minds have sought to understand the fundamental aspects of the world around us. That knowledge gained is the vehicle behind 21st century technology, which, where it is applied, has relieved the yoke of some of the more limiting aspects of human existence. Yet the benefits of this knowledge is not equally distributed within micro and macro society and societies at large. Hence the necessity for us as a species to understand what our fundamental motivations are and adjusting them to always accommodate the needs of others around us. Then, by realizing our similarities, build back from that knowledge a way of existing that limits the yoke of the consequences of the more limited aspects of our nature. Consequently, understanding ourselves, our basic nature, and how it affects our more abstract existence is a route to which we can create a better life for ourselves. Hence, why the knowledge of self is the ultimate knowledge. Understanding our lesser nature is the vehicle to bettering our greater nature. Hence, creating balance and addressing the dichotic dilemma wherein everything is influenced by the contribution of opposing forces and a balanced outcome always being the greatest state of existence. It's really hard for me to class my writings or really say what it is or how to even pigeonhole it. But the main thrust is the fundamental evaluation and analysis of the state of what it is to be a human being. So I'm not quite sure what to make of this episode today. I was very much in a heightened state, wanting to express these views I had about Mr. Douglas Murray and the opinions and the point of view that he puts out there into the world. And of course, well, suffice to say, it's a strange life that we live, and human existence is something that's truly outstandingly unfathomable. And all I'm trying to do is figure out as I go, first of all, but most importantly, um, address the imbalances of our human existence. And of course, one of the most pertinent ones is economic and social imbalance. And I think I've made the point. So please like, share, and subscribe. And it's, of course, just a platform for me to speak. So I don't know what or how it's resonating, or it will resonate with people out there. But ultimately, the only way to truly change the world is to engage in meaningful, open, and ultimately constructive dialogue. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.